organizations. So I think there is an element of fear. And I think that's driven by there being there's a lot of noise around AI. So I wouldn't necessarily call it hype, because I do think this will revolutionize how we work. I do not think we will be working how we work now in 12 months' time. It will be entirely different. The commonality is that we are still seeing AI used to conduct automation of day-to-day tasks, right? That is the primary use case at the moment. It is about creating more time in people's diaries that is spent doing manual, repetitive works and turning those into automated workflows, as opposed to, I suppose, the creation of additional capability or the real driving of efficiency and productivity from organizations. There is no silver bullet or correct answer that we know now that will probably apply in 1, 2, let alone 10 years. So customers are resistant to probably making those commitments for a long-term period. I think they are waiting to see if a new answer comes out in 6 months' time that may make the answer that they gave now redundant.
Welcome to the AI Adoption Podcast. I'm your host, Professor Ashley Braganza, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome Chelsea Chamberlain from Roc Technologies to today's episode. Chelsea, before we go much further, could I ask you to introduce yourself and to introduce Roc Technologies as well, please?
Absolutely, and thank you for having me, Ashley. So Chelsea Chamberlain, I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Roc Technologies. Roc Technologies is a managed service provider who provides digital transformation and IT managed services across the UK's public and private sector.
Chelsea, thank you so much for that introduction. I just wondered, as you're dealing with both the public and private sector, what are some of the similarities and differences between rolling AI out into those two different sectors, please?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really interesting dynamic that we're seeing between public and private sector. And I think we're seeing a real push for collaboration between public sector organizations and local private sector businesses as well. So we've seen that within, for instance, healthcare and local government and higher education, a real drive for CIOs, CTOs, and CISOs around these organizations to get in contact with their private organization peers and start learning lessons from each other regarding AI adoption, AI tooling, how it's adding that return, and how it's really being used in real life. I think one of the key differences that we've noticed is around the pace and the skill that are being brought in for AI adoption. So we see really heavy investment in AI skills within sectors such as legal, banking, pharmaceuticals, for example. So private sector organizations where, the governance of data is still really key, as it is within the public sector, but they do seem to have been able to accelerate their kind of data control in readiness for AI adoption. So one of the key things that appears to be holding public sector organizations back is looking at that data security element and giving cybersecurity teams and, boards the confidence, I suppose, to really utilize AI tools at an enterprise scale, because you're giving lots of people access to a lot of data, and you need to be sure that that data is accurate, is appropriate for them to have access to. So that's probably one of the key areas in which private sector seems to have accelerated beyond their public sector counterparts. I do think the commonality is that we are still seeing AI used to conduct automation of day-to-day tasks, right? That is the primary use case at the moment. It is about creating more time in people's diaries that is spent doing manual, repetitive works and turning those into automated workflows, as opposed to, I suppose, the creation of additional capability or the real driving of efficiency and productivity from organizations.
And does it vary within the public sector? Do you see some differences between different departments or different parts of the public sector in terms of the experiences that you've seen?
Absolutely. And I do think to a degree, it comes down to cost. There is a cost of AI. We shouldn't go into this thinking that the AI is wholly accessible to every organization, because I think at the moment it probably isn't. And we see, real cuts in public sector spending So local governments, as an example, are particularly hit by that. Their focus at the moment is on themes of devolution, trying to come together for cost saving exercises, being forced into technology refreshes, using legacy tools because that's what they've got the upfront capital funds to be able to afford. So I think that barrier to entry on AI for public sector bodies that do not have cash, are not cash rich, is still very much apparent. Where we are seeing public sector be really successful in this space, I think, is on their really strict approach to return on investment and business case. So where public sector organizations are leveraging AI, I actually think they're doing that potentially in a more successful and streamlined manner than some of their private sector organizations, because they can't afford to throw spaghetti at a wall and see what sticks. So they can't afford to invest in every latest shiny tool out there. They also can't afford not to show that day one return to their board. So we have seen some of our public sector customers be really successful in streamlining, for example, end user services, looking at automation and the application of AI within their service desk functionality, chat functions, and voice assistants have become really popular in terms of driving some of that efficiency and meaning that they can do more with less, and that is showing really clear ROI. Within higher education, their focus obviously switches more to research. So some of our higher education customers are investing a lot in the research and development of AI and actually utilizing their undergraduate and postgraduate programs to bring AI into their business, as it were, and into their business model, which obviously is a great return for them and also gives something back to their student communities as well.
Thank you. That's really interesting to see that there are differences, not just between the public sector and the private sector, but there are also differences within the public sector as well. What's the role of IT providers in terms of AI adoption?
The role of IT providers is a really interesting topic as we look at the adoption of AI, and actually what role service providers specifically can provide into public and private sector businesses. So within IT support businesses, you've really got two different avenues of revenues, right? So you've got your professional services, one time, it's project-based, maybe consultancy-based, but that kind of digital transformation piece. And then you've got managed services, recurring revenues, long-term contracts, where typically you are delivering business as usual services over a prolonged period of time. What we're seeing with the rapid change of AI adoption is that there is a lot of opportunity within one-time professional services and digital transformation, because not only are organizations looking to invest in partnerships and within service providers who can give them some additional skills in that area and also put in the technologies that they require and give them consultancy around the adoption of AI, but they also need to transform their wider infrastructure estate, such as their network, to be geared up for AI adoption in the first place. So, one of our vendor partners uses the term AI for networking and networking for AI. So we're very much seeing the move, and that there's lots and lots of opportunity within that professional services space. Where I think customers are becoming a bit more cautious is over the commitment to long-term recurring services. And I think that's ultimately driven by the fact that the change of technology and the change in how AI is perceived to be able to help us long-term, or how it will impact our lives long-term, is there is no silver bullet or correct answer that we know now that will probably apply in 1, 2, let alone 10 years. So customers are resistant to probably making those commitments for a long-term period. I think they are waiting to see if a new answer comes out in 6 months' time that may make the answer that they gave now redundant. And I think there definitely is a lot of fear around that. And we are seeing sales cycles get longer as a result of that. We are seeing much more onus when we're looking at competitive tender processes placed on showing additional value over and above just the technology that you're putting in place, and how you're going to be able to evidence that return on investment, and how you're going to make sure that that implementation is future-proofed.
In some ways, arguably, AI is almost a victim of its own success, because at one level, the technology is changing so rapidly, and companies and boards are rightly concerned about making investments that they could find they're writing off in a few years' time. But is that a good enough argument for not getting started?
I think it's an argument for not getting started. There is this, and I don't think it is resistance. I think it is probably best categorized as fear, as worry. You don't want to be the CIO who spent public funds potentially on AI adoption, on an AI tool, on an AI company that actually in 6 months' time is proven that that business case is not valid, or it's made redundant by another bigger, better business case within the AI space. So I think there is an element of fear. And I think that's driven by there being there's a lot of noise around AI. So I wouldn't necessarily call it hype, because I do think this will revolutionize how we work. I do not think we will be working how we work now in 12 months' time. It will be entirely different. So I think there is a real need for everyone to try and get started in some way. But I can understand the fear, especially within fund constrained public sectors, around making a decision that could be fundamentally incorrect in quite a short period of time.
I guess the one of the areas that AI is being used quite a bit is around service desks, and I just wonder whether you think, are service desks even going to exist in the future?
Oh, this is a big question when I've got a lot of service desk colleagues that may be tuning in. I think managed service providers will exist. I think that's kind of a key message that I'm certainly looking to embed with our COO, for example, within Roc's long-term strategy, is that we are focused on being a managed service provider and a managed service provider for the long term. So I definitely think there is still a place for that. I do not think AI will replace architects, for example. I do not necessarily think that AI will replace the people who can come in and create a bespoke design for your networking infrastructure, for your cloud infrastructure. But what I do think it will be able to do, and is evidencing that it can do, is rapidly troubleshoot and get to the underlying root cause of issues, incidents, and problems in a much quicker way than humans are able to. Now, at the moment, there is still an absolute need for service desk agents, because the component parts of the AI tools that are being introduced by technology vendors are not communicating with each other. So there is still an absolute need for service desk agents to take the learnings from one AI component that maybe operates your networking LAN infrastructure with the AI-driven manager that looks after your cloud-hosted infrastructure, and make the synergies between the two of them and bring those together to find, to conduct things like root cause analysis and find a fix. As we move into agentic AI, and as there is a push for technology vendors to operate standards-based open API protocols within their technologies, I do think that communication between the tools may mean that we see a shift from a focus on first-line troubleshooting more to managed service providers being really relied on to provide that additional third-line accountability oversight, as opposed to that initial triage.
That sounds like AI is going to bring a significant amount of change through organizations. Do you think boards are ready for the changes that AI is likely to drive?
I will give the really short answer within the IT services space is that I don't think they are ready for that. And I think the main reason for that is that boards do not see that this needs to be necessarily a board-driven change. So I think there's very much still an onus on the people doing the work within the organization, the delivery organization, operations, even to some degree, the CTO office with, Roc has 4 practice leads across networking, cyber, cloud services, and data and AI and automation. And I think there's still an onus that it's those people who need to find the use cases and find the tools and, incorporate those tools into their day-to-day work. But what we're still doing is exactly that, incorporating those tools into how we work today. Whereas I think fundamentally AI is going to change the processes of how we work and actually what work is driving value within organizations that offer end user services, whether that's internally done within an organization and they have their own IT service support team, or whether that's within businesses like Roc. So I think the very first hurdle we have to overcome there, actually to get to a point where boards are ready for the changes, for them to accept that AI adoption is a board driven mandate and is top of their board objectives and priority lists, probably for the next 5 to 10 years. And it really needs to be driven as part of their strategy, because it will change not only the technology that they're using, but fundamentally how their business is shaped, people, culture, behaviors, and how they work with their partners.
And I guess the question then is around how boards can kind of prepare themselves for this. What are your thoughts there, Chelsea? What should boards be doing to kind of get ready and prepare themselves for these changes?
To start with, we have to talk to organizations where they have been successful. So there are a few, I wouldn't say it's the vast majority by any stretch of the imagination, but there are a few organizations in each sector who are showing that they are accelerating beyond their peers within this space. So I think that open dialogue and communication and how they approached it is going to be really important. There are obviously an absolute abundance of businesses offering to give you advice on how you may or may not adopt AI with a price tag associated. But I do think that is probably for most organizations a necessary investment. And I think that investment will see significant return versus looking at just what's the next technology refresh that you're going to do, what's the next tool that you're going to buy and plug into how you work today. Because as I said, I think how you work needs to fundamentally change first. I think the next thing is to be a little bit evangelical about it, right? And in my role, I get the benefit of not doing hands-on delivery. I get to look and do a bit of blue sky thinking and say things that where people roll their eyes and think, yeah, that's never going to happen. But I think we need to do that. So I think we need to sketch out as board members, as executive teams within organizations, okay, what do we think our business is going to look like in 5 years' time with the use of AI, ignoring the fact that we have history and legacy and drag and existing customers that we need to service who maybe aren't as far on that journey, and then look at where we are today and do that kind of gap analysis, right? What needs to happen between where we are now and where we know that we need to be to stay relevant within our market in 5 years' time? And I actually think that would be quite eye-opening for a lot of businesses if they started to ignore the things that they perceive that they can't change or can't do and look at fundamentally where it is they need to go and then start creating an action plan of how to get there.
One of the things this leads me to, Chelsea, is on the one hand, we've got this technology that's coming through, and on the other hand, we've got companies that are going to have to change and adapt to these technologies. I wonder if you could just reflect on just the organizations and from your experience of working in the companies that you and the both public and private sector organizations you're working with, in terms of their ability to actually absorb these technologies. What are your thoughts on their ability to absorb these technologies?
I think the first thing I would say is that a lot of the organizations that we're working with, certainly the more vocal ones, the ones who want to look at what's coming next and really embrace AI, are becoming increasingly frustrated with the sheer volume of products, of promises to change, fundamentally change organizations and be that disruptor within the technology space. I think there is a frustration from customers that AI in any measure is being included within technology investments, whether they like it or not, whether they perceive a need for it or not, because technology providers want to brag about the fact that they are AI driven or AI first, or the AI leaders within their sector. So I think there is a frustration there that AI is being overlaid, whether organizations are ready for it, whether they're able to see the return, whether they're set up as businesses from a skill perspective or even a structural perspective to take advantage of these AI functionalities, because it is being overlaid on technology that they fundamentally need, regardless of whether AI adoption was even a thing that we're talking about.
And I guess that ability to absorb those technologies and not just talk about them or kind of put a label or a banner which says, hey, we're AI driven, whereas actually, underneath the bonnet, there really is very little need or application there in itself could have an adverse effect on the broader adoption of AI. And I guess cycling back, potentially hold companies back from making their investments in the first place.
Exactly. And I think what it does is it means that companies are forced to adopt AI potentially in ways that they wouldn't choose to, because that fundamentally is where their funding is being forced to go. where in actual fact they've identified use cases that they now can't afford to invest in because they've had to do other forms of transformation, which have included an AI overlay that where perhaps they don't see the value in that. I think that's where the role of service providers like Roc can really still continues to add value. So you'll know about, and you know, all of the listeners will know about the fact that managed service providers talk about continual service improvement, right? And it underlines when you put out a transformation plan and you put on a service transition plan, there is an underlining line that goes across the whole of the page that says continual service improvement, because we're doing it all the time. I think that continual service improvement shifts now to look at how we are actually going to leverage and adopt the functionality that our customers are already being essentially forced to pay for, and how we're going to enable them to leverage that additional functionality. So it comes away from, okay, how are we going to generate less alerts? How are we going to make sure there's less downtime? How are we going to make sure that user requests are addressed in a quicker time? And I think it actually becomes about how we're going to leverage functionality that you already have, that businesses are currently not set up to take full advantage of, and how can we apply that in real terms to operational use cases to drive value and to give the board and those executive members that return on investment that maybe wasn't seen as a primary benefit, but can now be seen as a secondary benefit to taking on these tools that already have AI overlay built in.
Great. Well, what I'd like to do, Chelsea, is really now kind of shift the conversation a little bit in terms of one of the big issues that's coming up with AI is around sovereign AI and the risks associated at the moment around the geopolitical pressures that the UK and elsewhere. I just wondered what your thoughts are in terms of sovereign AI and risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a subject I feel quite passionate about. So my background is a lot of defence, a lot of public sector, as we've already talked about, and Roc primarily services UK centric organisations. So sovereignty is something that we as an organisation take very seriously. It's something that I personally take very seriously. And when we're talking to our vendors and our partners, it's, you know, the first or second question that we'll ask is around things like data storage and how are we making sure that we're protecting that either within, you know, UK, European data center space. One of the things I would point out as a slight aside that I've definitely noticed in my role going to lots and lots of vendor showcases and events and things like that all around the world is that the first topic that vendor CEOs are standing on stage and talking about is AI. And the second topic is cybersecurity and sovereignty. And I think there's been a real shift to that over the last 12 months, that probably when the AI bubble first grew, we weren't seeing that much conversation about it. But now there has definitely been a flip, which tells us that when customers are talking directly to technology vendors, that this is a topic that is coming up time and time and time again. So it's really important, I think. The UK in itself is not currently challenging within that AI space. And I think that's probably fair to say. And I think most people would agree that in terms of our ability to fund and provide a home to big tech, you know, most of that is hosted currently in America and in China and Asia and various other places. So I think there is a need for us to probably look at how realistically we as a country are going to enable ourselves to adopt leading edge technology while also protecting ourselves, but probably not being naive in the fact that we will need to utilize technology that is hosted overseas. So I think it's about working within specific guardrails as opposed to saying it has to be sovereign and that has to be the answer and that's the mandate. I think we need to look at why is that the mandate? What's the outcome that you want to achieve by doing that? And do we have a way of achieving that same outcome while leveraging technology that perhaps is hosted overseas? And one of the driving forces behind that, you know, is again, cost. The cost of space within the UK is an absolute premium. And the need for AI is already driving up costs of data center storage, locations, infrastructure, capital programs. And we are not we're not a massive country, so space is always constrained. So I think that cost element really comes into it as well.
I guess the other big issue in terms of AI and AI adoption is around the need and the growth of data centers, and along with those data centers becomes the issue of energy and how these data centers are going to be powered up. I just wondered again, from your perspective, if you could just reflect on, you know, the growth of data centers and the energy consumption that goes with them.
Absolutely. Energy is a really interesting topic, and actually, we do have customers within the civil nuclear energy space, within energy research space as well. So it's something that we talk about quite a lot, about the drivers around energy and the funding that is going into that. The UK is in a really interesting position when it comes to energy, because we are looking at new energy sources, or different energy sources now, specifically nuclear, as an example. In parallel to that, we are running huge decommissioning programs around the same energy sources that we are actually investing in. And there is a need for that, but we are running these two things in parallel. Well, where on one hand, we're talking about the decommissioning of nuclear, the decommissioning of energy sources, and the essentially desettlement of those areas, specifically in really remote locations. But then on the other hand, we are running huge investment programs and looking at how we invest more in sustainable energy, such as nuclear as well. So I think it's a really interesting point with data centers specifically. The cost, in my opinion, and from my perspective, we need to look at how the government programs around that and the big technology companies who are developing these AI products and technologies come together and work in collaboration with other industries as well, higher education, with local governments, with central government, with companies like the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, to look at how they will be funded, what space is actually available, and what are these timelines when we look at investment versus decommission. I think it's really, the need is for it to be much more collaborative potentially than it is now, and to really work with large AI technology companies who are arguably much more cash rich than our government organizations and our public organizations, perhaps to offset some of that immediate capitalized cost around data center investment, around location investment and infrastructure build, to enable the adoption of AI within industries such as public sector, so that we can start receiving that return. And it kind of creates that almost circular economy element to it as well. So, I may be being entirely optimistic that large technology companies are going to say to public sector organizations, sure, have some of our money so that you can start being more efficient and more productive and offering better services to the population. But I do think there is a real serious conversation needed there. And I think the technology companies that really lean into that could see a real advantage long term in terms of working with these end user organizations.
Chelsea, thank you for that very insightful response in terms of what is a very complex issue around energy and data centers, and all the, at one level, the vested interests of the various people and the parties that you've identified that do need to collaborate if this is going to happen. Chelsea, thank you so much for some really interesting insights into just a whole set of issues around AI adoption in the public sector and the private sector. I think your comments about the need for transformation and for boards to engage with the implementation of AI kind of top down and not leaving it to kind of just a bottom up set of use cases, I think is really helpful in terms of kind of moving this on. Because I guess if I have a concern, it's that lots of organizations have use cases and instances of AI being implemented in very small parts of the organization, and then struggling really to get either the investment and the senior management leadership support to scale those initiatives. And I think you've given some excellent pointers as to how boards ought to be coming to this area. So thank you so much for being on the AI Adoption Podcast. I really appreciate you giving me and my listeners this time.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for having me, Ashley. It was a really enjoyable conversation. Thank you.